Before penicillin, Hollywood could buy gowns, mansions, doctors, and silence. What it could not always buy was rescue. Behind the polished death notices of old fame, the public often heard cleaner words: pneumonia, collapse, exhaustion, poisoning, tuberculosis. But later accounts sometimes leave a darker shadow, especially around untreated syphilis, toxic treatments, and minds slowly slipping beyond help. This is not a judgment. It is a story about timing, secrecy, and medicine arriving too late. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and what time is it there tonight? Maurice Costello. Often remembered as Maurice Costello, he was one of the first great screen idols. Before Hollywood had fully learned how to manufacture stars, he already had the face, the posture, and the romantic authority audiences wanted. The Los Angeles Times later described him as a turn-of-the-century matinee idol and one of the early screen lovers. But his later story did not keep that shine. Costello moved from leading man fame into smaller parts, bit roles, and a kind of half-visibility. The public version was simple enough. He was an old silent-era figure overtaken by time, technology, and changing taste. Here is the darker caution. The syphilis connection around Costello should remain a maybe, not a clean diagnosis. Later rumor and retrospective suspicion have been attached to cognitive fading and reduced reliability, but the record is not firm enough to call it confirmed. That uncertainty matters. In early Hollywood, silence was not empty. It was a system. Costello's chapter becomes the first warning note. Sometimes decline was not explained. It was simply allowed to disappear behind age, temperament, and the convenient fog of a vanished era. John Barrymore. He was not just handsome, he was theatrical royalty. Britannica remembers him as the Great Profile, a man associated with Hamlet, Richard III, and a kind of stage command that made language feel dangerous. His voice was part of the legend. His face was part of the architecture of American acting. That is why the collapse hurts. By the mid-1930s, Barrymore's screen power was fading. Accounts of his later work often describe erratic memory, failing reliability, and the painful need for help with lines. The public explanation was available and cruelly easy: drink, aging, scandal, self-destruction. But some later writers and film historians have also treated his decline as medically complicated, with syphilis sometimes raised in a debated register. It should not be stated as a proven diagnosis. The safer truth is that the darker possibility lingers beside better documented alcohol-related damage and public deterioration, and that makes the story more haunting, not less. Because Barrymore's tragedy is not just that a star fell. It is that the man who once seemed to own speech itself became remembered partly through the fear of losing it. Old Hollywood could still photograph the profile, it could still sell the name, but it could not restore the command that had made him feel immortal. That is why the medical uncertainty must be handled with restraint. Barrymore died in 1942, and many accounts place the visible disaster inside alcoholism, exhaustion, and failing health. The syphilis shadow belongs beside that record, not over it. Scott Joplin. He gives this list its strongest anchor. He was not a Hollywood actor, but his life belongs to the same pre-antibiotic nightmare. Genius caught before modern treatment could save the body or the mind. He was the king of ragtime, the composer of Maple Leaf Rag, and a musician trying to push popular music toward something larger, especially through his opera Treemonisha. The cleaner public story is often just that Joplin declined, struggled, and died too early. The fuller medical story is harder. Reliable accounts widely connect his final illness to tertiary syphilis, specifically neurosyphilis. By 1917, he was admitted first to Bellevue and then to Manhattan State Hospital. He died there on April 1, 1917. Here's the cruel part. This was not merely a physical ending. Neurosyphilis could attack memory, judgment, personality, and movement. For a composer, that is almost unbearable to imagine. The inner architecture of music threatened from within. Joplin's recognition also arrived late. Treemonisha did not receive the full attention he dreamed of in his lifetime. His grave remained unmarked for decades, so his chapter is not rumor shadow in the same way as others here. It is clearer, colder, and more devastating. The tragedy is a genius racing time, while the century he lived in had no reliable rescue waiting. The dates make the sadness sharper. His final period came after years of ambitious work, failed commercial hopes, and declining health. In that last movement of his life, the public did not yet have the vocabulary modern listeners bring to neurological disease. They saw breakdown. We can now see the possible medical cruelty underneath. Rudolph Valentino. He is the rumor shadow chapter. He was the silent screen's great erotic myth, the chic, the Latin lover, the man whose sudden death created public mourning so intense it became part of his legend. But his official medical story is not syphilis. Valentino collapsed in 1926, underwent emergency surgery, and died at 31 from complications, including peritonitis after abdominal illness. Modern medicine even remembers Valentino's syndrome, where a perforated ulcer can mimic appendicitis. So why include him here? Because his chapter shows how Hollywood's secrecy trained audiences to suspect hidden explanations. When an idol died young, fans did not only grieve, they searched for the forbidden cause. Rumor rushed into the space where medical clarity, studio control, and public hysteria collided. Valentino's tragedy is that even a documented official cause could not protect him from shadow. His body became a screen after death, and everyone projected fear onto it. Olive Thomas. She was young, beautiful, and fast-moving, the kind of silent-era figure who seemed built out of light. She had been a Ziegfeld beauty, then a film star, then the wife of Jack Pickford, brother of Mary Pickford. Her public image carried glamour, youth, and danger in the same breath. Then Paris turned Gothic. In September 1920, Thomas swallowed mercury bichloride in the Ritz. She died days later from the poisoning, with acute kidney damage reported in accounts of the case. The official ruling was accidental. The press, of course, made it scandal. Here is the darker part, and it is essential to frame it correctly. This is not a chapter claiming Olive herself had syphilis. The horror is the treatment culture around her. The mercury solution was reportedly connected to Jack Pickford's treatment for syphilis. Before penicillin, mercury compounds were part of the terrifying medical arsenal, toxic, dangerous, and sometimes more nightmare than cure. That detail changes the room. The disease may not have belonged to Olive, but the century did. A bottle meant for treatment sat close enough to become fatal. Her death shows how pre-antibiotic medicine could haunt even the innocent bystander. In this story, the shadow was not only infection, it was the desperate cure. Mercury was not a Gothic prop invented by storytellers. It was real medicine in an age desperate enough to poison the patient while trying to treat the infection. That is why this chapter changes the rhythm of the list. Mabel Normand. She should be remembered first as a comic force. She worked with major silent comedians, helped shape screen comedy, and carried a quickness that made her feel alive in a medium without spoken sound. She was not just a scandal figure. She was talent. But the public learned to see her through trouble. Her name was pulled near the 1922 William Desmond Taylor murder investigation, though she was ruled out as a suspect. Then came another shooting scandal involving her chauffeur. Meanwhile, her health weakened. The official medical ending was tuberculosis. She died in 1930 after time in a sanatorium. The syphilis angle here must stay conditional. For Normand, the stronger facts are tuberculosis, scandal, exhaustion, and a body losing ground. If later rumor tries to darken the story further, it has to be treated as rumor and possible misreading, not evidence. That is exactly what makes her chapter sad. A woman's illness was swallowed by gossip. The public kept staring at scandal, while the real tragedy may have been simpler and worse. She was young, sick, watched, and misread until the light went out. Alma Rubens. She was luminous in the silent years, a face that could hold melodrama without needing sound. She rose quickly, worked opposite major names, and seemed to have the fragile intensity that early Hollywood loved. Then her life became a collapse in public. In the 1920s, addiction damaged her career. By January 1931, she had been arrested on cocaine possession charges. Soon after, she developed a cold that worsened into lobar pneumonia and bronchitis. She died at 33. The public version was scandal, narcotics, and ruin. Those facts are already tragic, but her chapter also belongs to the larger medical messiness of the period. Later associations sometimes place syphilis in the background of stories like hers, yet the evidence here should remain conditional. Addiction, infection, poverty, shame, and untreated illness could all overlap until no one label explained the damage. That matters. Rubens was not a tidy case file. She was a human being caught in a system that loved beauty when it sold tickets and recoiled when the body became difficult. Her haunting is the absence of one clean answer. Tallulah Bankhead. She arrives like smoke and lightning. She was wit, appetite, danger, theater, and voice. Britannica notes that she became almost as famous for her personal life as for her acting, which tells you how quickly legend consumed the woman. Her decline was read through excess. Alcohol, cigarettes, lovers, scandal, and that ravaged glamour people later mistook for the whole story. When she died in 1968, the recorded cause was pneumonia, complicated by emphysema and malnutrition. The syphilis angle around Bankhead is murky, and should remain murky. This is not a confirmed diagnosis chapter. It is a chapter about how a personality so large invited every rumor to attach itself. And that uncertainty is the point. Bankhead's public image was built to survive almost anything, but even she could not make decline look harmless forever. Sometimes the darker shadow is not proof. Sometimes it is the eerie knowledge that the public never knew where performance ended and suffering began. Barbara Marr. She was sold almost as a warning and a fantasy at once. The girl who was too beautiful, too restless, too awake for ordinary life. She wrote, danced, acted, and burned through silent Hollywood with a speed that made people turn her into a myth before she was 30. Her official end was brutal enough. In January 1926, she died at 29 from complications associated with tuberculosis and nephritis. Accounts describe her health collapsing during work on The Girl from Montmartre, a coma on set, kidney inflammation, extreme weight loss, and a funeral that drew enormous crowds. But Marr also became a magnet for darker explanation. Drug rumors followed her, though later biographical work has disputed some of those claims and warned that stories about morphine arrests may have been confused with Alma Rubens. Syphilis rumors should also remain conditional, part of the shadow language around beauty, illness, and Hollywood silence rather than a settled fact. Still, she belongs near the end because she embodies the whole nightmare. Glamour, exhaustion, studio pressure, bad medicine, rumor, and a body giving out before reliable cures could rewrite the ending. History remembers the beauty. The darker reading asks what that beauty cost when no one could stop the erosion. Marr's fame also depended on a public appetite for women who seemed impossible to contain. The same culture that applauded speed and excess often looked away when speed became collapse. By the time illness could no longer be styled as glamour, the ending was already closing in. Mary Nolan. She began as Imogene Bubbles Wilson, a Ziegfeld girl famous enough that scandal could launch and destroy her at the same time. After a public affair with comedian Frank Tinney, she left for Europe, returned under a new name, and found real film success in pictures like West of Zanzibar and Desert Nights. Then the public image cracked. Her career declined in the 1930s amid drug problems, legal trouble, hospitalizations, debt, and periods of obscurity. She later spent time in psychiatric care and was treated for malnutrition. In 1948, she died from a seconal overdose, listed as accidental or suicide. The syphilis association here must be handled carefully. It remains uncertain and should not override the documented story of abuse, addiction, institutional failure, and abandonment. That is enough tragedy. Nolan's chapter does not need a forced diagnosis to haunt us. It shows another version of the same pattern. A woman turned into glamour, then into gossip, then into a problem no industry wanted to claim. The public remembered the face. The system forgot the person. Her later possessions were few. Even the remains of fame seemed scattered into estate sale fragments. That detail gives the chapter its final chill. These stories are not only about disease. They are about silence, timing, and bodies trapped before rescue arrived. Fame could polish the myth, but not always stop the decline. Which official Hollywood story do you now question most? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell for more untold stories.